Thank you, Alex. You say the nicest things. Can I, first of all, start by just making an observation? I think this has been an absolutely brilliant meeting. That for anyone who's come tonight, who's nervous about next week or needing inspiring, I think the speakers that we've had have absolutely been uplifted, and it is a brilliant start to the week that's going to see mass strike action next week. So I want to congratulate the organisers, those activists who called the meeting. It seems to me that we're all going to be back in London. The TUC is in London this year, the first week of September. That's where there's going to be a huge debate about the next wave of mass strikes. And I think it would be a very good thing if we had other meetings like this to ensure that we can discuss and debate the strikes that we're going to need. And I hope that everyone can unite in coming together to ensure that we get our activists and those who are doing the work in the branches on side and working together to deliver the action. Look, it's been a long road to get to where we are. Some of us were talking about coordinated strike action a number of years ago. Some of us in the TUC were in a small minority, and I want to publicly pay tribute to you, Kevin, not just for the excellent speech that you've just given, but since you've been Deputy General Secretary of the NUT, I can say publicly I feel a lot less lonely in the negotiations with government. And I can say that whilst none of us ever forget, the people who deliver the votes in the unions are the activists who work tirelessly day in, day out. You being in your position in the NUT undoubtedly contributed to your fantastic ballot result of 92%. So well done to you and all those in the NUT. And I also pay tribute to those activists in my own union, the PCS. We've come in for a barrage of criticism from the government in the last week. We're too left-wing, we're too militant, we want strikes, we don't talk. And our members didn't vote in great numbers in the ballot. There isn't any other national union in Britain that's had 7 national strike ballots in the last 7 years. Every one where members voted in favour of the action, sometimes when we stood alone amongst the civil service unions fighting to defend our members' terms and conditions. And our union has, I think, been prepared to stand up. And the people who've made that happen, many of them are here tonight, are our activists in the workplaces, large and small, who, by the way, are being victimised in greater numbers now than has ever been the case before by ruthless employers. You have been absolutely fantastic in delivering for our union, and we will all get our rewards next week when you know, that long road in recent months has seen in PCS strikes in the Equality and Human Rights Commission, strikes in the Public Guardian's Office, strikes in the Majesty's Revenue and Customs, and strikes in call centres in the DWP. Let me say something about the call centres in DWP. You know, some union leaders used to say, you can't organise in call centres, nobody wants to join a union, it's impossibly difficult. Well, I tell you what, our members in the call centres in DWP joined the union in record numbers, voted for a strike by one of our biggest majorities ever, and are taking strike action, yes, against the shitty conditions they work in, but also to defend the service to the public that they feel so proud of. I want to also do 2 other things just before I get to the industrial action next week. I'm not sure we would be here today if it wasn't for the brilliant action that the students took at the ballot. I was never lucky enough to be a student, but I tell you, I want to say this. It was absolutely inspiring to see people on the streets, making noise, marching in huge numbers, and yes, being prepared to take direct action to draw the attention of the people of this country to the outrageous attack. Whilst we praise the students, I also want to praise someone else. Because I think the activists who came together to form UK Uncut have transformed the way that we're campaigning in Britain. Tell you what, our union has for 3 years been making the case about tax justice, the outrage that Sir Philip Green in one body swerve can avoid paying £250 million in tax, then he gets brought in as a government advisor. We've made the case that there's £123 billion in tax that's avoided, evaded and not collected. But I tell you what put it on the front pages of the newspapers. It was young people sitting in Topshop shouting, "Pay your tax." Yeah. Is not afraid to say, we're proud to say, that we're working closer and closer with UK Uncut, and they're absolutely welcome, as far as we're concerned, to do as much as they can on the 30th of June, and I look forward to the breakfast as well. Now, let's understand why I started from this perspective. You see, there's been a lot of coverage about public sector pensions. Kevin's brilliantly set out the case of the robbery that's going on in terms of public sector pensions. You see, I think we also have to understand that public sector pensions, in and of itself, gave us the ability to create legal, coordinated action disputes amongst different unions because we're all being attacked at the same time. But public sector pensions are one part of the austerity cuts that the government is taking out on working men and women, pensioners and students, the length and breadth of the UK. And that's why in PCS, our ballot, yes, it's about pensions, but it's also about jobs, cuts in services, and pay freezes. I would like us to remember that if you work in the public sector, you have a pay freeze for the last 2 years. When inflation is 5.2%, it isn't a freeze, it is a cut in your living standard. And understanding the breadth of the attack gives us the solution as to how we're going to defeat it. And one of the things that we've said in PCS that I think is worth repeating is we have to understand that everything we have fought for over generations is at risk of being taken away. If we lose this battle, our communities, our people, the length and breadth of this country will not recover for years. The breadth of what they're doing is absolutely staggering. In education, they triple tuition fees, they make 60% cuts in the MA. In the NHS, they seek to privatise large swathes of it, ensuring that the private companies can make billions, whilst most of us suffer a worse service. On pay, they freeze the pay of public sector workers. They rob our pensions, but they're also setting us up for an orgy of privatisation that is going to see multinationals benefit to the tune of billions, while the public sector is shrunk back to historically low levels. And in our communities, it means we will see our swimming pools go, our libraries shut, our nurseries shut, our social services cut back, people living in deprivation and poverty without any hope, but with only a bleak future ahead of them. Now, the right-wing commentators say that this is all apocalyptic and it's scaremongering. But the right-wing commentators and the multi-millionaires in Cameron's cabinet do not use our services, they don't use our schools, they don't use our health service, and they don't care. Of our eyes. And let me make one last point in terms of the scale of the cut. Let us not forget, there's something that doesn't get enough media. The government's assault on the welfare state, on lone parents, disabled activists, pensioners and the unemployed is absolutely breathtaking. We fought for this welfare state over generations. PCS members are proud of the work they do in DWP. But we do not want to preside over administering a system that less and less provides for those who need it, and actually will see us being rolled back decades if the government get away with what it wants. And we have to understand that in cutting welfare and the NHS and public sector pensions, the government are trying to do something quite cynical. They are trying to divide people the length and breadth of the country because they know if we are divided, we have less of a chance of winning. So where they try to divide us, we have got to unite. We have got to say that whether you're in work or unemployed, whether you're a student or whether you're a pensioner, whether you work in the public sector or you work in the private sector, whether you're on a medium income, the national minimum wage, we all have to be in it together, and we've got to defend every job, every service, every benefit and every pension, the length and breadth of the country. And that means something loud and clear that the TUC are still reluctant to say. Our slogan should be no to all cuts. situation worse. If people are out of work claiming welfare, not in work paying tax and insurance, the economy will get worse. So there's an economic argument, a sound argument that we've got to start making. The cuts will make it worse. I think Greece is proving the point. The cuts in the Greek economy have not solved the problems are worse, and let us tonight send a message that we stand with the working people of Greece in their battle. If we don't unite those on welfare and in work and those people in all our communities, something else will happen. Yes. The stench of racism and bigotry will rise in a way we haven't seen for years. We will have working class white communities encouraged to think that they haven't got a house because they've got immigrants next door. They can't get into the school because there are people who are asylum seekers who have been given advantage. We have to say, the only way to deal with the stench of racism and bigotry is to fight for better services, more public services and more public spending, and to defeat the BNP and the EDL wherever they raise their voice. Final points. There's been a lot of media in the last week. All of us have been attacked. A strategy seems to be unfolding. Divide the moderate unions from the militant unions. Divide those who want to negotiate from those who just want strikes. Divide those from the public sector from those from the private sector. Let's make one thing loud and clear. Private sector workers are not exploited by public sector pensions. They're exploited by shareholders and greedy capitalists. Taking bit of hypocrisy to expose. The Daily Mail believes that this strike is going to victimise single parents. But I tell you what, for a newspaper that harangues single parents every day of the year, it is a bit rich that they are now talking about the Dunkirk spirit, single parents uniting against the strikers. The people who care about single parents are trade unionists and those of us who work in the communities who want decent benefits, decent childcare facilities to ensure that our single parents can be looked after. And that also means exposing. When they attack the unemployed, when Duncan Smith tells people in Merthyr Tydfil to get on the bus to look for work, we should never tire from saying 1,700 people unemployed in Merthyr Tydfil, 39 jobs advertised in the job centre. It is not the people of Merthyr Tydfil who are to blame for the problem. They are the victims of the problem, and we should stand with their community and everyone else. We've all got our own particular campaign or our own particular axe to grind. But comrades, what we've got to do now is to lift our sights. We've got to understand what is needed to defeat the government's proposals. We've got to be clear about how we follow March the 26th and June the 30th. And let me say to you what I said in the TUC General Council today and at the Executive on Tuesday. Nothing will transform the anti-cuts movement in Britain more than mass strike action across our country. Representing 750,000 people. It's dominated the media for a week. It was the lead item on the news. Opinion polls are already being shifted, and we can see people inspired by the fact that some are prepared to take the lead. So we've got to have a strategy. We've got to understand that next week is going to be fantastic, but it is not going to defeat the government's austerity package. I think it's unlikely at this stage to get any concessions, but if they make any, it will be to try and divide us one from another. And that's why we come back every time to saying we are opposed to the whole lot. So let me give you a slogan that we in PCS believe sums up the mood. 750,000 on strike next week. Let's make it 4 million on strike in October. Incredibly. It will show working people when they stand together that they can change the political tide. It will show people who are at risk of losing everything that we can defend everything. But we aren't going to get to 4 million just by wishing it to happen. Next week's important, but it is important that every activist, in all of the unions on strike, and all of the unions who want to ballot later in the year, turn the words into action. We need to ensure that the talk of mass strikes becomes reality. We need the government to understand we won't be divided, and we're going to keep it going. And that means, as we move from next week to mass strikes in the autumn, there's a very important role to play for continued strikes in different sectors across the economy. And let me say, in PCS, we will be meeting the week after the 30th of June, and we will be hoping to see, across our employer-based groups, strikes break out over cuts in jobs, strikes to defend terms and conditions, strikes that show the employer that they need to feel the heat, as well as the government feeling the heat of the political action that we take. Whilst all the mention has been of the ATL, the UCU, and PCS and the NUT, let's also say something about the local government workers in Southampton, in Doncaster, in Birmingham, in Camden. When I was walking Tower Hamlets at the brilliant strike of the NUT and Unison, I made a point in my speech of saying that, brilliant as it was, we needed to turn Tower Hamlets into the same situation there in every town and every city in the UK. We needed to turn that into coordinated strikes. Well, it's only been 3 months since Tower Hamlets, and Tower Hamlets has now become 750,000 in 4 unions on strike. You can't claim all the credit, Alex. But it has now become 750,000 people on strike. Let's make sure that those strikers in unison and unite in the local government strikes next week. The teachers, the lecturers, and the civil servants are inspired by what they do next week, that they inspire everybody else, and that we are back here in the autumn facing the government down by saying, you back off. You back off our people and you back off our communities, or there will be mass strikes and we won't stop until we win. Solidarity.